We continue now at the top of Daf Chav Gimel Amid Beis and Meseches Avodah Zara. This is Avodah Zara Daf 23b. This Daf is sponsored by David Grossman. Thank you for your sponsorship. If you would like to sponsor an Amid or a Daf, see the description box below, and see the description box below to see how you can support this channel. On the previous Amid, the Gemara suggested that maybe it's a Machlokes Tanoim, whether we are concerned that Ovdei Kochavim engage in bestiality with their animals. And the Gemara brought a proof to this from a Mishnah in Meseches Parah. It's talking about the Parah Aduma over there, and the question in the Mishnah is whether you can purchase a Parah Aduma from a non-Jew, from an Oved Kochavim, from an idol worshiper. And Rabbi Eliezer says you are not allowed to, and the Chachamim, the Rabbanan, say that you are allowed to. And so the Gemara suggested on the previous Amud that is exactly the Machlokes. Rabbi Eliezer says you cannot buy the Parah Aduma from the Oved Kochavim because there's a concern that the Oved Kochavim engaged in bestiality with the animal, which would disqualify it from being a Parah Aduma. And the Rabbanan disagree. They say there is no such concern. And the Gemara now is in the middle of suggesting that maybe actually the Rabbanan in general do agree that there is a concern, and maybe they're only lenient ella b'parah, maybe they're only lenient by the Parah Aduma, the dameh yakarn, because it's very expensive. Aval b'shar karbanos module, but maybe by other karbanos they would admit. And Rashi explains, Ela b'parah aduma dedameha yikarim dechayish over kochavim lehefsid meruba, because there already the over kochavim is afraid that the Jew's not going to want to purchase it as a parah aduma because it's going to be a big loss of money, and so therefore v'chayif liyitzrei, therefore he overcomes his yetzer hara. He doesn't engage in bestiality with the animal. Avol b'shar karbanos modu, but maybe by other karbanos, maybe the Rabbanan admit, maybe everybody agrees there's a concern. And Rashi notes, v'had tanya la'el, and that which we learned in the Brisa earlier, lochin mehen behema, that you can purchase from them animals for karbanos. Aman tirmia, then you're not going to have anyone to say is the author of that Brisa. Lo Rabbi Eliezer v'lo Rabbanan, it would not be Rabbi Eliezer or the Rabbanan, because again, everybody seems to agree that there is this concern. And so that's what the Gemara now says, v'alahad tanya, but that which we learned in the Brisa, again, we brought previously, lochin mehen behema l'karban, that you are allowed to purchase from them animals to be karbanos. So who's that going to be? Lo Rabbi Eliezer v'lo Rabbanan. It's not going to be Rabbi Eliezer or the Rabbanan, because right now we're suggesting that the whole machlokas between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan is by Parah Aduma. Only over there are the Rabbanan lenient, but actually everybody would be strict when it would come to other karbanos. V'yoden further, Tanya behadya, we actually learned in a brisa explicitly. Mayo sivu lechav roi Rabbi Eliezer. What did the colleagues of Rabbi Eliezer? What did they ask him? They said from a pasuk. The pasuk actually indicates that you are allowed to purchase the animals from the Ovdei Kochavim for karbanos. It says kol son kedar yikav tzulach. It's talking about the fact that all of these sheep of kedar, they're going to be gathered to you, and yalu, the pasuk goes on to say yalu al rotzon mizbechi, that they're going to come on the mizbeach, and so therefore it sounds like from the pasuk itself, there's a pasuk in Yeshayahu that we are able to get animals from the Ovdei Kochavim in order to be karbanos. Rashi explains called son kedar yishmal. Kedar refers to Yishmal. Uchsiv yalu al mizbechi. It says they're going to go on the mizbeach. Alma b'shar karbanos nami shar. You see, by other karbanos it is permitted. The Rabbanan are not only lenient by Parah Aduma, and then we really do have a good answer. In other words, we can say that the contradiction earlier is answered by the fact that it's simply a Machlokes Tanoim. What do we mean to say? Again, it's a Machlokes Tanoim whether there is a concern in terms of bestiality or not. The Rabbanan say there is no concern. Rabbi Eliezer says that there is a concern, and that would be a Machlokes Tanoim. And the Gemara continues, Ad kan lo pligi ela b'chashasha. The Gemara says, this is an independent idea. The Gemara says this entire machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan, again assuming there is a machlokus between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan in terms of the Parah Aduma and in terms of other karbanos, they're only arguing whether there's a concern for bestiality. Aval heicha devadai rava. But let's say we have a situation where we for sure know that the Oved Kochavim engaged in bestiality with the animal. So apparently it would certainly be true that the cow would be possible to be a Parah Aduma. You cannot have a Parah Aduma if it engaged in bestiality. Shema mina, and so the Gemara says, you see from this, the Parah Kadshe Mizbeach, that the Parah Aduma is considered to be Kadshe Mizbeach. Kadshe Mizbeach really means animals that were made hektish, that they're going to go on the Mizbeach as karbanos. And Kadshe Mizbeach are disqualified in situations of sodomy, in situations of bestiality. And so the point of the Gemara is, you see that Parah Aduma is considered in the category of Kadshe Mizbeach. The Kadshe Bedek Habayis, because if you're going to say that it's in the category of Kadshe Bedek Habayis means that you sanctified something that essentially its value you is donated to the Beis HaMikdash for the repair of the Beis HaMikdash. But if you're going to say that para aduma goes into that category, mi mifsala baravia, so is sodomy really going to disqualify the animal from? Is that a disqualification by bedek habayis? That's not a disqualification, and so therefore it seems to be that para aduma actually is in the category of kadshe mizbeach. That's the point of the Gemara. But the Gemara says not necessarily. Shani para, it's different by the para aduma, even if it's considered kadshe bedek habayis. The chatos kirya rachmana, the pasuk refers to it as a chatos, and therefore it has the same halachas as chatos, just like let's say by a carbon chatos, there is this disqualification of bestiality. That would be true by para aduma as well. And Rashi explains, Ad kan lo pligi, again, they're only arguing, Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan are only arguing, Milsa bape nafshe kamer vazel, this is an independent idea. They're only arguing ela b'chshasha, they're arguing whether there's a concern by this particular para, whether it engaged in bestiality. Hecha de lo chazin and derav, if we didn't see that it engaged in bestiality, pligi, then there's a machlokes, tamar chayish or mar lo chayish, one is concerned and one is not concerned. And so the Gemara said, but if it would be that we know for sure that the animal engaged in bestiality, so it would be disqualified from para aduma. And so the Gemara said, you see that kadshe mizbeach, it's considered to be kadshe mizbeach, din kedushas mizbeach yeshla lipasel b'ravi. It has a din of kedushas mizbeach, and therefore again it's disqualified if it engaged in sodomy, if it engaged in bestiality. Ule'inyan pedia, and in terms of redemption, there's halachas of redeeming items from hektish, so also it's going to be considered kadshe mizbeach. Delo nafka lechol below mum, you won't be able to redeem it, that it will now be considered chulin unless it gets a blemish. V'af agav delav lemizbeach karva, even though you're not actually offering it on the mizbeach. By karbanos, by kadshe mizbeach, the way that you redeem them from being hektish is that they develop a mum, and that's going to be true by para aduma as well if you consider it to be kadshe mizbeach. Because if you think that it does not have a stronger kedusha than bedek habayis, it's just in that category. The halach is the kedushas bedek habayis that can take effect on anything, even on stones. So on my pasla baravia, so why would there be a disqualification of sodomy? And then the Gemara answered, Shani para de chatos kiri rachman. It's different by para aduma because it's called a chatos, meaning liolam gabe pediya v'hamod v'haracha din kadshe bedek habayis ola. In terms of all the halachas of redemption and evaluation, it's considered bedek habayis. Umiyu le'inyan psulin, but nevertheless, in terms of disqualifications, sagya milsa la'asuye b'psul dechatos kirya rachmana le'meinida chatosi. It says in the pasuk meinida chatosi. It uses the word chatos, therefore it does have this disqualification again in terms of bestiality. But the Gemara continues and asks, Ela me'ata, but according to that, tipasel b'yotzei dofen, so it should also be disqualified. Let's say it's yotzei dofen. Yotzei dofen means that it's born through cesarean section. That also should be a disqualification. And Rashi explains, Tipasel b'yotzei dofen, it should be disqualified by yotzei dofen. Tipasel hu l'shar karbonos, that is a disqualification by other karbonos. The Tanyas we learned in a brayso, shor okesed prat l'kilayim, o'ez prat l'nidme, ki yivolid prat l'yotzei dofen. It says ki yivolid, that excludes yotzei dofen by karbonos. V'haikra b'karbonos ksiv, and this pasuk is written by karbonos. And the point over here is, if you're going to say that the word chato says that it has all the disqualifications that apply to karbonos, like bestiality is a disqualification by karbonos that applies by para aduma also, so then yotzei dofen should also apply, just like it applies by karbonos, it should apply when it comes to para aduma as well. And the Gemara continues and says, now if you're going to say, indeed that is true, that there is a psul of yotzei dofen by para aduma, but alama tanya, so why do we learn in the brayso? Hikdisha biyotzei dofen psul, if he sanctifies it as yotzei dofen, this is talking about para aduma, then it's disqualified. Rabbi Shimon machshir, but it says that Rabbi Shimon says kosher. Rabbi Shimon says that yotzei dofen is not a disqualification. Rashi explains, Hikdish biyotzei dofen, hikdish lapara aduma, yotzei dofen psul. It says if he sanctifies the para aduma and it's yotzei dofen, so then in that case it is disqualified. But again, Rabbi Shimon says kosher. Why would Rabbi Shimon say kosher in that situation if you're going to say it has all the disqualifications of a carbon because it says chatos? Now, if you're going to say Rabbi Shimon l'taime, maybe you'll say that Rabbi Shimon follows his opinion. We find in another context, Diomar yotzei dofen vlad ma'al yehu, because it happens to be Rabbi Shimon holds that yotzei dofen is considered like a regular offspring. But the Gemara says not true. V'amar Rabbi Yochanan says mo dehoyer Rabbi Shimon. Rabbi Shimon does admit le'inyan kadshim she'eno kadosh, that when it comes to kadshim, when it comes to karbanos, it does not have sanctification. In other words, even Rabbi Shimon, we'll see in a moment, who says that yotzei dofen is considered vlad ma'al yehu, he does not apply that to karbanos, and so therefore he should not apply that to para aduma either. If you're saying that para aduma, essentially because it's called chatos, has the same disqualifications of other karbanos. Rashi explains Vlad Ma'alihu, again, this is the sheet of Rabbi Shimon, that Yotzei Dofen is considered regular offspring. That's Meseches Nida. That's talking Meseches Nida. That's actually talking about human birth. Yotzei Dofen in Yoshan Olav Yemei Tumah Yemei Tara. When it comes to a Yotzei Dofen, it's a Syrian section, so normally there are days of Tumah and days of Tahara after birth. That does not apply by Yotzei Dofen. Vein Chayovin Olav Carbon Leda. There's no carbon Leda is not brought. That's Rabbi Shimon's opinion. Rabbi Shimon Omer, that's the Tanakama's opinion rather. Rabbi Shimon Omer, but Rabbi Shimon says, Harehu Kiyolad. Rabbi Shimon says, no, when it comes to Yotzei Dofen, it is considered like a regular birth. V'yesh lo tumas shiva l'zocher u'shvayim l'nekeva. There's a week of tumah for a male if the child is a male. There's 2 weeks of tumah if the child is a female. V'chein yemei toar v'karban. There's also days of purity and karban, meaning to say, even though the Tanakam, even though the Rabbanan hold that when it comes to Yotzei Dofen, it is not treated like a regular birth. Again, this is talking about when a mother gives birth in terms of Yemei Tumah and Yemei Tahara. So even though that's true according to the Rabbanan, Rabbi Shimon disagrees. Rabbi Shimon says that Yotzei Dofen, it's considered Vlad Ma'ali, and all of the halachas of Yemei Tumah and Tahara apply. But the Gemara says that's all true when it comes again to the dinim of Yemei Tumah and Tahara by people. But Moder Rabbi Shimon Linyan Kachim, Rabbi Shimon admits when it comes to Karbanos, the Behema Sheyotz Derech Dofen Psula. He says that an animal that comes out by cesarean section is disqualified carbon, is disqualified to be a carbon. The Gabe Tumah v'Tahara the imo who dekamar le Rabbi Shimon may riboy hakasev im nekeva teled, by specifically when it comes to the situation of Yemei Tumah and Tahara. So there's an inclusion in the pasuk. It says im nekeva teled hosiv leida acheres l'rabos Yotzei Dofen. So he learns out leida. There's another leida that's included. Yotzei Dofen is included. Avol b'kachim modi, but he doesn't apply this by karbanos. V'had Rabbi Yochanan Meseches Nida. This statement of Rabbi Yochanan is in Meseches Nida. And so therefore the Gemara is back to its question that again, if the reason that Parah Aduma is disqualified when it comes to bestiality is because of the fact that it's called Chata, so then there should be this disqualification of Yotzei Dofen as well. Why would there be one disqualification and not a different disqualification? And so the Gemara instead gives a different reason why Parah Aduma is disqualified in cases of bestiality. It has nothing to do with Chatas. Elashani Parah, rather it's different by the Parah Aduma. Hoel umum posel ba. Since we know that a blemish is a disqualification when it comes to Parah Aduma, Devar erva v'Avoda Zara nami posel ba. So if you have situations of arayas, meaning to say bestiality, or you have a situation of Avoda Zara, let's say it was designated as Avoda Zara, so then it actually would be disqualified because those are compared to mum, but it's limited to those disqualifications. It wouldn't be every disqualification that applies to karbanos. And how do we know that Dvar erva and Avoda Zara, that they're similar to mum, to blemishes? Because it's written in the pasuk. The pasuk says ki mashchasam bahem mum bam. It talks about mashchasam bahem, which is a language of hashchasa, which we'll see in a moment, that a language of hashchasa, corruption, that means Dvar erva and Avoda Zara, and that's compared to mum in this pasuk. V'tana devei Rabbi Shmuel, was taught in the yeshiva of Rabbi Shmuel, kol makom shenemer hashchas, anytime it says the word hashchasa, corruption, eino ela Dvar erva v'Avoda Zara. That refers to Dvar erva or Avoda Zara. Dvar erva dechsiv, how do we know Dvar erva? Because it's written in the pasuk, he hishchitz kol basaris darko ala oretz, is by Noach. It says everything was corrupt. V'Avoda Zara dechsiv, Avoda Zara also, because it's written in the pasuk, pentashchisun v'asisam lachem pesel. It uses the word pentashchisun, and that's the source for this disqualification. And Rashi explains, Hachi Garcina Nelashani Parahola Mum Posel but Vareva Avodas Kocham Posel Techsiv Ki Mosh Chasam Behem Mum Ve'Tan Devei Bishmal Kol Makam Ad Pentashchisim Kol Shamum Posel Bo Lo Teima the time of the Mifsala Beravia. Don't say that the reason why there's a disqualification by bestiality Mishum the Chatz Kiri Rachmana, that's because Parah Aduma is called Chatz. Elahainu time, rather the reason is as follows: the Avagav the Kodshe Berek Habayis, even though it is in the category of Kodshe Berek Habayis, Hoel Mum Posel, but since we know there's a disqualification of blemish, Kedechsiv Asherin Bo Mum, like it says in the pasuk by Parah Aduma Asherin Bo Mum, so therefore we know to include Dvar erva, which is nirva. That's again a situation where it was sodomized, and Avodas Kochavim, and also a case of Avoda Zara could go in Muksa. Let's say it was designated as part of Avoda Zara. V'nevad, let's say it was worshipped as Avoda Zara. Psulin ba, then it's going to be disqualified. Because corruption is compared to a mum, that's compared to a blemish. And the Gemara therefore concludes, Paranami, when it comes to Parah Aduma as well, Hoel Mum Posel ba, since again a blemish is a disqualification, Dvar erva v'Avodas Kochavim pasli ba, again Dvar erva and Avodas Kochavim will be a disqualification. And the Gemara continues, Gufa, returning to what we said above, Tani Sheila, Sheila taught, my time of Rabbi Eliezer. What's the reason of Rabbi Eliezer? Again, going back to Parah Aduma, in a situation of the Parah Aduma, when you buy the Parah Aduma from a non-Jew, so Rabbi Eliezer said that that's not going to be good as Parah Aduma, and we explained explained until now that the reason is because there's a concern for bestiality. But on the previous Amud, there was quoted from Sheila a different explanation, that what's the reason of Rabbi Eliezer d'chsiv, because it's written Daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yikchu, it says speak to b'nei Yisrael and they will take, and we learn from there b'nei Yisrael yikchu ve'eno ovdei kochavim yikchu. So we understand from there that it's b'nei Yisrael yikchu. We understand, as the Gemara said in the previous Amud, the idea is that you should purchase from Bnei Yisrael, purchase the para for the para aduma from a Jew, and don't purchase it from an Ovid Kochavim, and that's really the source for Rabbi Eliezer. And so the Gemara says, Elamei ata, but according to that, if you're going to learn from the word yikchu, or v'yikchu, so daber el Bnei Yisrael, v'yikchu li truma, the pasuk says, speak to Bnei Yisrael and they'll take from me offerings, and this was talking about, again, donations in terms of the Mishkan, that's what the pasuk was talking about. So hachanami de Bnei Yisrael yichu, ve'en Ovdei Kochavim yichu, so it's only Bnei Yisrael that take, and not the Ovdei Kochavim that take, and meaning to say anything that you're buying in terms of, let's say, the Meseches HaMishkan, donations for the Mishkan, is going to have to be from a Jew and not an Oved Kochavim, but that's not really true. If you're going to say indeed that is the case, that everything we purchase as a donations for the Beis HaMikdash has to be from Jewish people, it's not true. V'amar Rav Yehuda Mar Shmuel, but Rav Yehuda says that Shmuel says, Shalu es Rabbi Eliezer, they asked Rabbi Eliezer at Heichon Kibud Avayim, how far does one have to go for Kibud Avayim? Amar Lem, he said to them, Tzu u're'u ma'osa Oved Kochavim echad la'aviv ba'Ashkelon, go and see what a particular idol worshiper did with his father in Ashkelon. V'dama ben Nesina Shemo, his name was Dama ben Nesina. Pa'machas bigshu mimenu avonim la'ephod. One time they asked from him stones for the ephod, and as we're going to see, the implication over there is that they would have bought it from Dama ben Nesina, even though he was an Oved Kochavim. And so you see that you are allowed to buy from non-Jews items that are going to be used in the Beis HaMikdash. Rashi explains, V'chitema hachanami da'asr liknos zohav v'avonim tovos l'malechas HaMishkan min Ovdei Kochavim. If you're going to say that it's forbidden to purchase gold and nice stones, precious stones for the Melechas HaMishkan from idol worshippers, and so we see that that's not the case. Ad heichon kibud avaim. How far is, to what extent is kibud avaim? Kama adam etzuva lihizar bekibud avaim. How much is a person commanded and warned with regards to respecting his father and mother? Ma'asa Ovid Kochavim. Look what an idol worshipper did. V'kol shekain Yisrael shemetzuva akach. Certainly a Jewish person who is commanded about this, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Chav Daled Amud Aleph.